You're listening to WCAT Radio, your home for authentic Catholic programming.
Welcome to The Open Door. Jim Hanink here with fellow panelists Ramos-Reyes and Valerie Niemeyer. Today, we discuss the ongoing pro-life struggle. We'll explore the role of nonviolent direct action. In addition, we'll tackle the question of the personhood of the pre-born human being. Of late, Pope Francis has commented on this question. Our special guest is Monica Migliorino Miller, the founder and director of Citizens for a Pro-Life Society. She's recently been released from jail. Her crime was taking part in a Red Rose rescue. Miller holds graduate degrees in theology from Loyola University and Marquette University and teaches theology at SacredHeart Major Seminary in Detroit. She's the author of The Theology of the Passion of the Christ, Alba House, The Authority of Women in the Catholic Church, Emmaus, and Abandoned, The Untold Story of the Abortion Wars, St. Benedict Press. And Monica, I believe you have a copy of that book.
Oh, yeah, right here. Okay, shameless plug.
All right, good.
I don't know if that shows up backwards or whatever, but okay.
All right. Now, I can't compete with that, but her article, It's Time for the Church to declare, no, it's time the church, get this right, declared the personhood of the unborn. This appears in the May issue of the New Oxford Review. Let's begin as we always do in prayer. Come, O Holy Spirit, fill the hearts of your faithful and enkindle in them the fire of your love. Send forth your Spirit, and they shall be created, and you shall renew the face of the earth. O God, who has taught the hearts of the faithful by the light of the Holy Spirit, grant that by the gift of the same Spirit, we may be always truly wise and ever rejoice in his consolation. Through Christ our Lord. Amen. Mm-hmm. Monica, if we may, could you tell us about the Red Rose rescue that landed you in jail and what it was like there? And the like?
Well, sure. I've been participating in Red Rose rescues since September of 2017. And some of your viewers may recall that some decades ago there was a very large, very robust rescue movement in the United States that really went full swing with Operation Rescue. I suppose the heyday would have been in the early years of 1990s. But since then, it really kind of fizzled out in about 1995 and thereabouts because of the Freedom of Access to Clinic Entrances Act that was signed by Bill Clinton in May of 1994, and that made merely doing sit-in activity, if that's what you want to call it, sitting down in front of the doors to an abortion center, it turned that into a federal crime. And there are other complicated reasons why the rescue movement phased out, but there were a bunch of us who continued to believe that this was important, and so we had a meeting in St. Louis with some old-time rescue leaders. And Joe Scheidler was there, for example, Joan Andrews Bell, John Ryan, John Kavanaugh O'Keefe, Randall Terry was there. And Father Stephen Embarado. And I had always thought that maybe we shouldn't be blocking the doors to an abortion. Not that I got a problem with that, okay? But I thought maybe we should just go into abortion centers, a small group of us, not a large group, but a small group of us, and quietly sit down in the waiting room and try to talk to the moms literally just, a few minutes before they're going to walk down what I call the hallway of death to abort their children, and give these women the last opportunity to make a decision to give life. And we would be there to offer them help. We would pass out pamphlets on abortion that would include abortion victim photos, and then roses. So it's a red rose rescue, because we literally would hand out roses to the moms, sometimes even to clinic staff if they would take it. And on the rose is a card that has more words of encouragement, but on the reverse it has the phone numbers to local pregnancy help centers. So we really try to get these moms to make a last minute decision to turn away from abortion. But the likelihood of every mom in the abortion center to do that is very low. We know that. So we have had women leave, but some women are still determined to kill their babies. And so an important part of a Red Rose rescue is that at least some of the rescuers have to stay with the victims, stay with the unwanted. And we will be in solidarity with them. We will continue to plead for their lives for as long as we can. We will not leave them. And that, of course, involves the possibility of arrest, because we won't leave. And the police come, and we try to negotiate with them and talk with them and delay our presence for as long as we can in a peaceful, nonviolent way. But we did one of these Red Rose rescues last April 2022 at the Northland Family Planning Abortion Center in Southfield, Michigan. And there were 6 of us that were involved. Northland Family Planning is run by a woman named Renee Chillian. She also has 2 other abortion centers in Michigan, so this is her family business, you may say. Her abortion center in Southfield is on the 2nd floor of a very large building that has a very large parking lot surrounding the building. It's almost impossible to do sidewalk counseling there, though there are pro-lifers that do go out, and I know that they have turned women away. But it's very, very difficult. So 3 people went into the abortion center itself. That would have been Father Fidelis Moshinsky, Jacob Greger, and Elizabeth Waggy. They actually went in to try and talk to the moms. 3 of us remained in the hallway outside, myself, Laura Geis, and Matthew Connolly. And that meant, so that way we were actually kind of really doing sidewalk counseling, if you will, in the hallway, because moms were getting off the elevator or coming up the stairs, and we had every opportunity to talk with them, give them pamphlets, give them the roses as they're walking down the hall to go into the abortion center. Anyway, we were arrested eventually, and charged with trespassing, interference with business relations, which are kind of a weird law in Southfield. It was a city statute, and then obstruction of an officer. Now I know that sounds a little ominous, but all that meant is that we didn't, quote unquote, obey the lawful order to leave. We didn't do anything else, and we went limp. They had to carry us out, but that was it. We had a great attorney, Robert Muse of the American Freedom Law Center, an amazing man. We went on trial in February of this year. We were denied the defense of others because the unborn are not considered others, even in the post-Roe, landscape. Michigan is a very pro-abortion state, unfortunately. And the unborn are not considered human. They're not persons. They're nothing. They have no rights. It's as if they don't even exist. No harm is caused when abortions are performed that would justify our trespass. So we were denied the defense of others and convicted. And then we had our sentencing on March 30th. So we're all back in court, and Judge Cynthia Arvant did something almost unprecedented in the history of the pro-life movement. But she copied something that another judge did to us in 2018. So she was going to put us on probation, all right, for 18 months, but there were conditions of the probation. And one of the conditions was that we were ordered to remain 500 feet from every single abortion clinic in the United States of America for 18 months. And bad enough as that was, but she went a step even further than Judge Barron, who did exactly the same thing for the first time in the history of the pro-life movement. She required that we comply, that we agree to the restriction. And in conscience, we couldn't. And we told her we couldn't, and we explained why we couldn't. I have an article coming out maybe today, maybe this week, in Crisis Magazine that explains all of this, actually. So you might, viewers might want to look up crisismagazine.com. I told Judge Cynthia Arvant, that's like asking us not to feed the poor, not to help people who are in danger. We can't comply with, and ironically, 2 days before we had our sentencing, so March 28th, I was outside of an abortion clinic in Detroit, the Summit Abortion Center, and I talked a woman out of an abortion. So I well within 500 feet of the abortion clinic, and I told her that. It didn't make any difference. So that's why we got the jail time, because we refused to comply. So I was sentenced to 45 days. Laura Geis was sentenced to 60 days. And the others were sentenced to 90 days. And the difference in the sentences had to do with how many recent convictions did we have regarding Red Rose Rescue, and I had the least. In fact, in one of our Red Rose Rescue trials, thanks to Robert Muse, I was not guilty. Usually I am very guilty, but in that case, not guilty. And I have a trial pending in Ohio. So, and also I was not convicted of one of the charges. So I had less convictions in this case. Okay. So there were different penalties. Father Fidelis just was released from jail 2 days ago on June 12th. 3 days ago, no, two days ago. So that's a Red Rose Rescue, and I would love it. We would love to have other people join Red Rose Rescue. I say just do one Red Rose Rescue. You don't have to commit to doing them all the rest of your life, but do at least one. And if people are interested, they can message me through the prolifesociety.com website, so no hyphen, prolifesociety.com, and then there's a contact tab, and just send us an email, and we'll get back to you and get you involved. So that
I might just ask you what it was like in jail. So what would you tell them?
Well, I'm not going to say jail is a pleasant place. I mean, the food is bad and the bed is hard and there's lots of noise. And but here's the thing. Here's how you have to look at it. And again, it's what I'm going to talk about in my article that's coming out. When a person of faith, a committed pro-lifer, goes to jail, it's your mission field. You're there to continue your witness to the sanctity of life. I gotta say, when the inmates, our fellow inmates, find out why we're there, they give us such respect. They just don't think we belong there at all, and that is very, very humbling. We're in a situation where we have a lot of contact with very broken people. I would have to say that probably 90% of the inmates are there for drug or alcohol-related problems. And so there's a lot of opportunity to counsel, to listen, to pray, to evangelize. We started a rosary group in the jail, so the women were praying the rosary with us. Some of them not even Catholic. Didn't matter to them, and oddly, we didn't even have to explain why it's okay to pray to Mary. I mean, they just got it. It was very, very. It was an incredible blessing. Talked two women out of abortions while we were there, in our cell block, and then the Matthew in the male part of the jail. He talked a guy out of forcing his girlfriend into an abortion because he overheard a phone conversation and intervened. So lots of blessings. And, the other thing that people need to realize is that going to jail may not necessarily be the outcome every time you do a Red Rose rescue. I mean, we've had rescues where we had charges completely dismissed. We had a rescue in Washington, D.C. where there were no charges even filed. I mean, it's. I know these are weird circumstances, and who can explain it. But we've gone from 0 to 90. That's been so nobody should necessarily fear that I'm going to spend a lot of time in jail. But again, that's the attitude you have to have. You're there to live your faith, carry the cross. I mean, what does it mean to be a Christian? But the Lord said, if you're going to follow me, if you're going to come after me, you have to pick up your cross and follow me. And so that's what we try to do when if that's the outcome of trying to do what is right.
That says something about the extraordinariness of the Christian mission.
Mm.
But maybe, Mario, you want to talk about a little bit or raise the question of the ordinariness of abortion today.
Well, I was thinking in a good friend who is with the Lord already, Raymond Dennehy. Many years ago, he gave me a paper he wrote, was refutation of Mary Ann Warren argument about personhood or not personhood. And my question was about to relate to what Pope Francis seems to not want to emphasize, the personhood of the fetus. It seems to me, correct me if I'm wrong, that to some extent he's making the same argument as Mary Ann Warren. So they come from a different philosophical perspectives, no question about it. I don't know the intention or what do you make of that?
I think it's hard to analyze or examine, why I don't know, where do I begin? I understand why Pope Francis said what he said. Okay, this was as I explained in my New Oxford Review article, Pope Francis did an interview with America magazine. Okay, and one of the interviewers, it was four people that were involved in the interview with him, and one of them brought up the issue of abortion, and she was pro-life. I mean, she said, we know abortion is wrong, and I can't remember exactly the question right at this time.
Monica, Valerie just posted the whole question, that whole exchange,
okay,
on our website page in Spanish in the original.
Okay. But Pope Francis has been very, very strong on abortion is wrong. It's an injustice. like hiring a hitman to solve a problem, talks about the throwaway culture, meaning treating human beings like trash. But he said in his interview, the unborn is a human being, but I cannot say yet a person because that's debated. Okay. All right. So that kind of got me going because as I argue, and I hope I argue persuasively in my new Oxford Review article, that the church could very well affirm that the unborn are full-fledged persons. Well, now, what's the difference between being a human being and being a person? So I am very positive and very secure that the reason why the Pope, made that a nuance, if you will, is because of the so-called debate. What's debated? Okay, why is personhood debated? Within Catholicism, forget about the United States Supreme Court in 1973, okay? Why should the personhood of the unborn be debated within Catholicism? Well, it goes back to that whole debate on when does ensoulment take place? When does the fetus, in utero, receive a rational soul, and then becomes, at that point when God does that, when does the fetus become a full-fledged person? Okay, somebody who is an individual with rationality. Okay, person. So ensoulment. Well, first of all, I argue in my article, we got to drop that form matter dynamic because it's based on false science to begin with. And Aristotle and Catholic theologians, including the great St. Thomas Aquinas, were basing this ensoulment, delayed animation, right, on false science. This idea that there are these stages, through that the unborn child goes through various stages: the vegetative stage, the animal stage, and then the human or rational stage, and that the unborn child has the body, in other words, the matter has to achieve a certain physical development before it could receive a rational soul. Okay. And in fact, they even argued based on, again, these false observations that go back to pre-Christian times, back to Greek philosophy, that the male fetus developed faster than the female fetus. And so the boys received a rational soul at about 6 weeks of gestation, and then the girls received a rational soul at 90 days past conception. All false. In fact, it might actually be the reverse, that the girls develop faster than the boys. Okay, with it, but all right. We need to scrap it. It's outdated, it's outmoded, and it's flat out wrong. And as I show in my article, in fact, it's in Evangelium Vitae, the Gospel of Life, the great encyclical of John Paul II, where he says, how could somebody be a human being and not be a person? Okay, so he puts it in a kind of a rhetorical question there, but the church treats the unborn as if they're fully human from the moment of conception. The theology, the science, and the philosophy is there, and so I argue that, as based on development of doctrine, the church just needs to flat out declare that the unborn are full-fledged human beings, along with persons, along with the rest of us. So there's that's what I'm trying to urge in that article.
Valerie, can you join us here and raise the questions that need to be raised?
Yeah, I'm very interested and I'm learning as we as we talk, because I remember too when I was pondering my own convictions about the pro-life um, issues and being in theology, graduate classes in theology and considering the ensoulment question. And, I'm conflicted because I can see, and some of the, even just the online interactions that I've had about kind of sort of advancing an awareness about the dignity of the human person, I've really run into some hard challenges in terms of people who really do feel that this matters, the rational nature of the self-awareness that a person would need to have to sort of be considered to be in the image and likeness of God, because they don't, if they don't have that level of reason and free will, that they aren't, how can they be considered persons? And I felt challenged by that, to be able, not so much personally, instinctually, but how to respond to that. And so I see where Pope Francis maybe had that, he's thinking of the folks who are in that camp, who are thinking that it's reasonable to question. There are people who think it's reasonable to question whether that word person can be distinguished from human being, and maybe perhaps not used at the earliest levels of development. So I'm pondering this aloud here, so I apologize. But Boethius, tell us what you think about Boethius's definition of a person as an individual substance of a rational kind. How does this play into the conversation?
Well, I just think that the human person, I don't think Boethius's definition contradicts my proposal. And in fact, I have an argument in my article that how is it possible for the fetus to develop humanly unless there is the form there by which the development can happen? And, the potentiality for rational thought is there from the beginning. The unborn child is not developing like a dog or developing like a cat. It's developing like a human person. And so I think Boethius' definition is helpful and certainly doesn't contradict anything that I'm proposing.
That's helpful.
Couple of stray thoughts. As Mario knows, they're my specialty. You said, or I heard you to say, that we need to drop the whole matter-form distinction. But I don't think you really mean that, because were we to drop that, we'd drop our whole understanding of material objects.
Well, what I mean is we need to drop delayed hominization.
Yes. And it is certainly the case that matter, which is in any discussion relative to whatever the object is we're speaking of, it's certainly the case that matter matters. God could not infuse a human soul into a rock.
Right.
That just can't happen, can't be done. So we want to retain the matter-form distinction. Now, there's no reason, and I think this is something you are bringing out very well, there's no reason to think that we don't have the right sort of matter from the beginning,
right,
from conception. And the matter is such that from conception, it's, number one, alive, but we don't have matter existing by itself, so it's informed matter from conception.
Yes.
And as informed matter from conception, it is indeed individual substance of a rational kind. And I think the Boethian definition is exactly what you're looking for, and not only does not contradict, but is the framework for a common sense, really, a common sense discussion of all of this.
Well, and I've also shown that, when all is said and done, the Vatican documents, statements of John Paul II, who even said from the beginning, we are in the presence of a personal someone. Okay. And then you've got documents from the United States Conference of Catholic Bishops regarding the subject of abortion, how people should be voting, and so on. And they say that the unborn child is a person with the right to life. Well, if you have the right to life, they should be protected as all persons are protected. I see the language is already there. The pastoral approach is already there, and so to be hamstrung by this delayed ensoulment argument, it's antiquated, it doesn't work, and it's just flat out wrong. That's why I rest my case, Your Honor.
If I may, as a mother, I'm pondering this, and it's helpful for me to think about how, even with my children, when we say grandma passed away and we're looking at her body in a casket, and I'm thinking with them and talking with them about how grandma is not there in the body. But after the resurrection and, in the fullness of time, she will be, and
right.
Her body will be glorified. And just this idea that humans are both body and soul, and some of the kind of heresies and the implications of those heresies that want to make the body sort of just a vehicle for this.
Right, it's the shell.
Higher levels being that's just merely spiritual. When I think about that, that's a comfort to me as a mother, and it's a hope to me as a mother to think I am my body and my soul, and that there is this temporary separation upon death. But it does make sense to me, again, common sense, that once you have the matter, which is at conception, you have the soul, because that is the kind of creature that God made us, is that we are a composite of body and soul. So that would have to be kind of,
well, yeah, because as I'm listening to you, Valerie, look, so are you saying that at 6 weeks gestation, you're just a body?
Right.
You're just flesh?
Right. Right. That is, it's helpful to think of the fact.
I mean, of course, now Aquinas would have said, well, you have an animal soul. Okay. Well, you never was. I at once upon a time I was the equivalent of an animal. Okay, I'm sorry, but that's just repugnant. Okay.
Yeah, and he's wrestling with, we all do wrestle. We all wrestle with these things. How do you treat? Because I'm sure at his time there was just as much pushback about, how to, just trying to wrestle with these ideas that, well, clearly that being isn't, self-aware and whatnot. But I mean, I can appreciate what he was trying to do and help categorize and analyze and give us language for challenges, for our kind of cognitive dissonance that we can experience. But I think that for the lay person, though, it's very confusing to hear it human being, but not a person. I can appreciate he's doing sort of this high level thinking experiment and trying to work through things on a very analytical sort of abstract level that not everybody's thinking on that level. Some people need to think through in those terms, but most people need to not be confused about the difference between a human being and a person, probably. Sorry, a little rambly there, but.
No, it's the way we think. We have to work around and work through these ideas. Mario, what do you say? You're poised. You're poised.
I have a couple of reflections about that I can say. The other I'm not going to say, but the first one is that you examine carefully the process by which we came to know the idea of the person in ancient Greece or in Rome. They never separate the person from a human being. Never. whether you use prosopon as the mask, or you use the word persone as the not only the character but the author of the drama or the comedy, always was a human being which was playing the role of a person, but never separated. You can distinguish, which is different, but never separate. If you move up to the reflection of the person in the Christian tradition, we get into the Trinity.
Exactly.
And so that get you the relationship between nature and person. And so, to me, the separation is Cartesian. I'm sorry. To me, is let me the other reflection, what I show my students. I don't know if I committed a heresy, but I think I'm not. If you separate the person from a human being, living being, then at the beginning of life in uterus, then you had to do the same at the end of life. So at one point, Ronald Reagan was not a person. So why? That rationality, which was supposed to be animating that matter, was, for whatever Alzheimer's symptom, was no longer there. Can we then claim that was still a person? Well, we can debate about that if we have this mindset, which I think the issue is the hermeneutic, that we are falling into. I'm not sure it's modernity, it's postmodernity, or it's just a lack of clarity about what really is out there. In reality, we begin knowing matter and so on and so forth. So the consequences of that separation is huge. Not only the sorry.
I think you can argue that newborn babies are not self-aware. So are we going to say newborn babies are not persons? Where are we going to go with this? So babies born with Down syndrome, who are mentally handicapped for the rest of their lives, are less human?
If I'm asleep.
People in comas. I mean, the argument might be made that, well, those are pathologies, okay? But the potentiality is there, but for a pathology. Okay, but still, you can see where the culture of life can exploit the argument that without self-awareness, without self-reflection, you're not fully human. And so you lose your right to exist. We cannot go there. We have to slam the door shut on that argument. So.
Mm-hmm.
Now, there's nothing more useless than trying to second guess the Pope, but there is, I think, a rhetorical strategy. If we talk about human beings, and I think Valerie was getting at this, if we talk about human beings, we'll bring more people into the conversation. That's one consideration. The other consideration is, if we talk about human beings, we can sidestep this historical debate about the time of ensoulment. So why don't we just talk about human beings? Well, one reason not to just talk about human beings is, as Mario points out, there's this post-Cartesian emphasis, and you see it in Max and John Locke, to distinguish between human beings and persons, and to give persons a status that we don't give to human beings. So it's a little bit like a card game. I don't want to play more cards than I have to. Well, if you don't play all the cards, you're going to lose the game in terms of the rhetorical ebb and flow. And then there's this whole thing about these deucedly dicey interviews that the Pope gives. On the one hand, you don't want to have to say, well, I'm not going to say anything, and the church isn't going to say anything that's not said in a formally issued encyclical, because then the vast majority of people will not be reading the formally issued encyclical. So you want to reach out to people verbally. So you reach out to them on airplanes. And when you reach out to them on airplanes, it's almost impossible not to get bogged down in ambiguities that are ambiguous from three different directions at the same time, at least. So pastorally, it's really difficult. And here I think that we folks, can play a useful intermediary, rhetorical, quasi-journalistic, quasi-philosophical, theological role. We can sort through in another public venue some of the issues that come into play in this. We could help the Pope out, really, by giving more of the background than he could possibly give, but also we can help our listeners. What a faithful group. We can help our listeners because we can say something that they're not going to be able to have access to unless they read in detail, once again, Evangelium Vitae, which they can't do anytime this week. So I think we perform a very useful function here.
Right, but I think the Pope didn't need to say what he said. If only he had affirmed that the unborn are human beings and thus have a right to life, he would have said all they needed to be said, because most people, I'm going to bet, unless they've been indoctrinated in a formal kind of way to argue the pro-abortion position. But if the Pope says the unborn are human beings and have a right to life, we're home free. He didn't need to add, but I cannot say a person. See,
yeah, I agree with you. I think that was ill-advised on his part. But in terms of the audiences, any college student in the United States who has had an ethics course in the last 40 years has heard this person versus human being distinction. That's commonplace. And so it's on the verge of being on the tip of the tongue of everyone.
I don't know if I agree with that, James. Because I think most people, maybe not, maybe those who have some more formal education regarding philosophy, okay, but I think most people, if you say the unborn child is a human being, they hear the unborn child is a person. They don't make that distinction.
I think they do, but I think things have always been deucedly complex. We've referred to Aquinas. Aquinas actually says of the pre-born human being that it is a virtual human being. He doesn't say that it's even a human being. He says it's a virtual human being. So we've got the virtual human being versus human being distinction. Then if you collect these things, we've got the virtual human being, the human being, and the person distinction. And this is a spread, okay. But it's a little bit like in the public forum talking about democracy. Whose democracy? What do you mean by democracy? Or talking about justice, as McIntyre would say, whose justice? Every one of the central terms of contemporary discussion is now disputed, and it's disputed from the level of Time magazine on up, which I think gives us all of us an ongoing job every day. Among all the other things we have to do is get the clarity that Mario is arguing for, that we need this clarity. And that takes me back to these deucedly dicey papal interviews. It's interesting that particular interview, Small World Time, was with Gloria Purvis. And Gloria Purvis, get this, Valerie, I bet you know this, was the moderator for the last debate of the 4 presidential primary debates of the American Solidarity Party.
Oh, is that right? Yeah.
Yes. So, gee, hang around long enough. I've been hanging around for 77 years. And it seems like everybody in town is connected with everybody else in town.
I want to throw in there. I mean, I think, Monica, I think you're right in the sense that, like, the average person doesn't just, I know there's no such thing as, but.
No, you didn't say the average human being.
Oh, yeah. I mean, I
average citizen.
I feel like there's this academia realm, and then there's this non-academia. And I think within academia, it's much more prevalent for people to think in terms of human being versus person and sort of delineate and categorize. In fact, one of my favorite quotes by the Pope when he recently became Pope was something to the effect of, we have this temptation to constantly be analyzing and categorizing. And, he's trying to challenge this thinking about the world in too much of an abstract and judgmental way versus, and this question in the interview was followed up by a question about, again, they're trying to get him to say, well, that the bishop shouldn't prioritize abortion over anything else. And, he just keeps coming back to pastorality. We need to be caring for souls, but I feel like he's a bridge builder. I feel like he's a bit of a bridge builder. I mean, he's a Jesuit. I went to a Jesuit college. I did, most of a master's degree at a Jesuit college university in theology. And I feel like, and when I look at the Spanish, he says, no digo una persona, pero ¿por qué se discute esto? Pero un ser humano. He says, I do not say person. And he says, it's a human being. I do not say person because this is debated, but a human being. And so he didn't say it's not a person. He didn't say it's not a person. He just said, I'm not using that terminology because that terminology is debated. That's how I read it. But
that would be the kindest reading, because I think most people, and you may be right, but I think when most people read that phrase or hear it, they conclude, oh, he's saying not a person.
And I think you're right. But I feel like because I think he's a bridge builder and he's trying to acknowledge the academic wrestlings, theological, philosophical, I feel like he's trying to acknowledge, okay, I realize that this is a thing that personhood is debated, right, for generations, right? But what he says prior to that, I mean, he's kind of if anything, he's emphasizing the obviousness of the evil.
Yeah, I hear what you're saying there, Valerie. But I think the problem with these kinds of interviews is that he's speaking off the cuff when maybe if questions were submitted to him ahead of time, he could have gone back and reviewed Evangelium Vitae. He could have said, well, John Paul II said, how is it you could be a human being and not a person? That would have been in his mind, right? He could have been prepared to make an affirmation that he didn't make. And I think that, frankly, that's his duty. I mean, it's not as if the church doesn't have a leg to stand on. It did have a leg to stand on. I show that how it is that the church has a leg to stand on. But when he's kind of doing things on the fly, things get sloppy. There's mistakes are made, And then, once the toothpaste is out of the tube, it's hard to fix it.
It's very tricky to
John Paul II said, and I don't have it on a page right in front of me, but it was a very memorable thing. He said, "They tell me no one understands what I write."
I don't really. Well, I don't know why he's saying that.
I had a pastor, stout-hearted, great guy, wonderful pastor, but he never had any exposure to any kind of phenomenological jargon.
Oh.
And this guy is as faithful as he could possibly be. He says, "I simply don't understand what he's saying."
In his encyclicals?
Well, he was being overly emphatic, but there are people for whom John Paul II was largely opaque because of his language. And I think that it's just about impossible for any one person to speak in a way that's accessible to just about everybody. And you have at the beginning, Marion's heard me say this at the beginning, Newman at the beginning of Grammar of Assent has a citation which says, and it's from Ambrose of Milan, he says, "Not in dialectic did God choose to save his people." How did he choose to save his people? Well, on the cross, of course, but the medium was the narrative and the parables and the challenges and the tensions that we find. And what kind of language? Koine Greek, the language of the people. So I think one lesson is that all of us have got to join. Here's a role for the laity. Certainly, all of us got to join in this theological discourse. There were times in church history, and the Greek fathers mentioned this, when if you'd go into the marketplace, you'd hear a debate about the homoousion. Well, that was a rant.
I want to affirm that what you're doing. I don't disagree, and I think maybe the point I was trying to make is that in the academic realm, of course, sophistry is always a thing, right? I feel like people get sort of sophisticated and they use terminology and sort of abstractions to sort of remove themselves from the plain common sense truth. And I think in that sense, I feel like I'm thankful that Pope Francis is sort of acknowledging, like, okay, we can debate this person terminology, but look, you got organ systems, you got the DNA, like he in a sense, he's challenging a sort of sophistry that will kind of sophisticatedly remove themselves from this this painful fact that we're killing people here.
Mario, we're down to 6 minutes in theory. We could always go another hour, but in theory, and I know you're against theory, but in theory, we're down to 6 minutes. So please join in.
Well, I have a very difficult time separating what the common, quote unquote, people think and what academics think. I don't think there is such a division. When I have been teaching for many, many decades, every group of freshmen, sophomore, when you deal with issues like abortion, they are all over the place. They don't have the common sense that human being is a person. No longer. Not even here. Not even in Argentina. Not even in Latin America. That's false. That's part of our imagination. We still have this Christendom. There's no such a thing anymore. And so when teachers, at least my experience and my colleagues is that when you deal with these ethical issues, you open for the opinion of the students. And the student will say, well, it's a person, it's not a person, a human being is a mass. Then you say, okay, hold on. And you begin tailoring the concept already said by them. and say, well, that's a person. That's a human being. What are the properties of a person? What is the property of a human being? And then, is that a human being, a person? And then you move from there. It's not that the teacher is the one who instilled that. That may have been 60, 70 years ago. Today, I think the acceptability or the acceptance of abortion has made concept a mess in the mind of people. And what Jim said about democracy, about republicanism, about everything. We live in a world where postmodern or post-truth is rampant. Now, of course, we may have our little group still have this common sense, and we are 75. Well, go and see people in their 30s and 40s. It's a mess. Now, I'm not saying that is what I want. What I'm saying is that this is what we do, and there's no separation much as we think we have this separation. Now, perhaps the Pope, I don't know what he thinks, is taking into account that, and he made a distinction. Now, the question for me, and that's for me, as a Catholic, is that what is the function or the role of a Pope? Is the same as I have in my class? Or does he need to confirm in the faith? Is his function just speculate as a private theologian? Probably. But when you are teaching as a Pope in a public setting, I think you need to assert something that is based on the tradition.
Exactly.
And the teaching. And you need to give certainty to a world which is completely uncertain.
Yeah.
That is my view. We live a very difficult time. And then I say, well, if that is the case and the Pope is speculating, well, what am I going to do? Well, I need to resort to the treasure of the tradition of the church and myself. I'm going to. And so, but how many people have this? I sometimes say this privilege of having studied theology and philosophy in order not to get this false, I think, this misperception. I don't know. It's a rant, but.
Well, I think that was basically what I was trying to do in my article, was to show that the tradition is there already, to assert that the unborn, that we need to drop the distinction between being a human being and a person. I think the Catholic Church is there, and we just need to. Again, as I said about 45 minutes ago, we need to drop the delayed harmonization theory. It's not. It's false science. It's based on false science. And I think that most people, this is a Catholic issue. The ensoulment thing is a Catholic issue. Most people out, a lot of people are, not most people, but okay, but there are people, the human being person walking the street isn't thinking about that. Mm-hmm. Their idea of a human being versus a person they're not thinking, ensoulment issue. That's a Catholic argument, okay? And it based on false Greek philosophy. Right? So that's all I can say. We need to go. It's time to move past that. Okay, and I think the church has already essentially done so. And in fact, in here and I'm going to have to leave pretty soon. It's already 11, but the theology is there, the philosophy is there, and so what has to happen here, frankly, is that the doctrine has to catch up with the pastoral practice, because unborn children cannot be killed from the time that they exist. Based on what? Okay, there are other arguments, and I know what they are. Okay, respecting the will of God, who wants to make a person, and you can't interfere with the creative action of God, and so on and so forth. Okay, fine. But the church is there. It just needs to break out and do what it's got to do.
One last thought, and then what really counts is the gospel for today. Last thought, authentic dialogue is not bargaining. In authentic dialogue, we say the whole truth as it is. Gospel for today. Jesus said to his disciples, "Do not think that I have come to abolish the law or the prophets. I have come not to abolish, but to fulfill. Amen, I say to you, until heaven and earth pass away, not the smallest letter or the smallest part of a letter will pass from the law until all things have taken place. Therefore, whoever breaks one of the least of these commandments and teaches others to do so will be called least in the kingdom of heaven. But whoever obeys and teaches these commandments will be called greatest in the kingdom of heaven." Come, Lord Jesus, come. Thank you so much.
Thank you. Thank you very much.
Spending my time with you. God bless you all.
Thank you. Good.
Hello, God's beloved. I'm Annabelle Mosley, author, professor of theology, and host of Then Sings My Soul and Destination Sainthood on WCAT Radio. I invite you to listen in and find inspiration along this sacred journey we're traveling together to make our lives a masterpiece and, with God's grace, become saints. Join me, Annabelle Mosley, for Then Sings My Soul and Destination Sainthood on WCAT Radio. God bless you. Remember, you're never alone. God is always with you.
Thank you for listening to a production of WCAT Radio. Please join us in our mission of evangelization. And don't forget, love lifts up when knowledge takes flight.